All right, let's jump right in. You ever stop and think, how on earth do we know what happened thousands of years ago? I mean, it's not like they had news channels or social media, right? Well, today we're going to become historical detectives to figure out that exact question. How do we piece together the story of our ancient past?
Our whole investigation really kicks off with this one single question from our source material, asked by a girl named Rashida. And it's a fantastic question, isn't it? It feels impossible. But here's the thing, it's not. We just have to know where to look for the clues.
And that is our mission today. We're going to see how the real detectives, historians, and archaeologists do their work. Their entire job is to hunt down and make sense of sources. Think of sources as the fingerprints left behind by people long ago. These are the clues they use to solve the mystery of what really happened. So, come on, let's open up the case file. So, where do we start? Well, our first line of evidence isn't some old artifact or a dusty book. Nope, it's the land itself. The mountains, the rivers, the valleys. They were the stage where this whole story played out, and they hold some of the very first and most important clues.
So here it is. This is our investigation board for this section. This map of the Indian subcontinent is where we're going to pin all our evidence. You see, every single location on this map tells a little piece of the story, how people lived, where they moved, and how they built their worlds. Let's start pinning up our first clues.
Okay, clue number 1 takes us right here to the Narmada River in central India. Just try to picture this. For hundreds of thousands of years, this area was home to some of the earliest people on the subcontinent. And these weren't just any people. They were incredibly skilled gatherers who knew the forest like the back of their hand, what roots to dig up, what fruits were safe to eat, and they were expert hunters too.
Now let's watch how the story evolves. We're moving northwest to the Suleiman and Kurthar Hills. Something absolutely huge happened here about 8,000 years ago. For the first time, people figured out how to grow crops like wheat and barley. They started to raise animals like sheep and goats, and they began to live in settled villages. This was a total game changer. This was the dawn of agriculture.
And you know what comes after settled villages? Something even bigger and more complicated: cities. Our next chapter unfolds right here, along the Indus River and all the smaller rivers that feed into it. Around 4,700 years ago, some of the very first cities in the world popped up right on these riverbanks. This was a massive leap forward for humanity. We're talking organized societies, trade, and culture on a whole new level.
And the story just keeps spreading. Fast forward over 2,000 years later, about 2,500 years ago, and we see another big wave of development, this time shifting east into the Ganga Valley. This is where we see large cities and really powerful kingdoms like the famous Magadha start to rise up. So you see, just by tracing these 4 little spots on a map, we can actually see a whole story of civilization taking shape and expanding across the land over thousands of years. Pretty cool, right?
But, maps can only tell us so much. They give us the where, but for the finer details, we need to look at our second category of evidence, things that people actually wrote down. You could almost call these the eyewitness testimonies of the past.
Now check this out. This is a manuscript. The name actually comes from Latin. Manu means hand, because these books were written letter by letter completely by hand. They were usually written on really fragile stuff like palm leaves or special bark from birch trees. And that right there shows you the challenge we face, because being so fragile, so many of them have been eaten by insects or just crumbled to dust over the centuries. They're gone forever. But if you wanted to send a message that was meant to last, you used an inscription. These were writings carved directly into hard surfaces, like stone or metal. Kings and rulers loved these. They'd use them to broadcast their orders or to brag about their victories in battle. They wanted to make absolutely sure their legacy, their words, would survive for everyone to see for centuries to come. So right here you can see the huge difference between the two. Manuscripts were delicate, and they could contain anything from epic poems and plays to scientific ideas. But inscriptions, they were built to last. They were the official record, the powerful voice of rulers. And this tells us something really important, doesn't it? It's about who had the power to make their story permanent. It was the rulers, the ones with the resources to carve their laws and victories into stone, ensuring we'd remember them. Other stories, well, they were much more likely to just fade away.
But what about all the people who didn't write things down? The vast majority of people, right? Well, to find their stories, we have to dig a little deeper. And I mean that literally. This brings us to our third line of inquiry, the actual, physical stuff that people left behind.
Welcome to the world of the archaeologist. These are the detectives who explore and excavate, digging under the surface to find the ordinary, everyday things of life. They find the foundations of old buildings, tools and weapons, pots and jewelry, coins, even the bones of animals, which can tell us what people ate for dinner thousands of years ago. Every single object they find is a clue in the puzzle.
Just look at these. On one side, you have a pot from an ancient city used almost 5,000 years ago. On the other, an old silver coin from around 2,500 years ago. Now, these aren't just old things. They're storytellers. They tell us about art, technology, trade, what people valued, and how they lived their daily lives. Even the simplest little shard of pottery has a story to tell, if you just know how to listen to it.
Okay, so we've gathered our clues, we've got evidence from the land itself, from ancient writings, and from objects buried deep in the earth. Now it's time for the big finale, to piece it all together and solve the case. But the answer we're about to find might be a little more complicated than we first thought.
So let's lay out our key findings on a clear timeline. We can see a definite story taking shape. It all kicks off with that agricultural revolution 8,000 years ago. That sets the stage for the first big cities to rise up on the Indus 4,700 years ago. And from there, civilization keeps growing and changing, leading to those powerful kingdoms in the Ganga Valley 2,500 years ago. This gives us a really solid framework, a backbone for understanding the order of events.
But here comes the twist. Not all stories are equally easy to find. Think about it. Kings and queens, they kept detailed records of their battles, their laws, their victories. Their stories are loud and clear. Their historical visibility is super high. But what about an ordinary farmer, or a hunter, or a potter? They generally didn't keep written records, so their lives are so much harder for us to piece together. Their voices are much, much quieter.
And that brings us to the single most important conclusion of our entire investigation. There is no one simple story called the past. The past was a totally different experience for a queen than it was for her servant. A merchant traveling the world lived a different past than a farmer who never left his village. There are many pasts, all happening at the same time.
And that leaves us with one final, big question to chew on. We now know that history is the story we can build from the clues that happened to survive. But what about all the clues that didn't? What about all the people whose stories were never written down, never carved in stone, whose voices from the past are still out there, just waiting to be heard?